Good afternoon once again. Welcome to our General Membership Meeting, Philippine and Australia Strategic Partners for Growth and Peace. Thank you to our event sponsors, Macquarie and Telstra. In today's session, we are pleased to be joined by Her Excellency H.E Hae Kyong Yu, Australian Ambassador to the Philippines. Ambassador Yu will share updates on the Philippine-Australian bilateral relationship underpinned by the signing of the Strategic Partnership Agreement during the Australian Prime Minister visit to the Philippines last month. Before we begin, let me acknowledge the presence of Ambassador Peter Kell of New Zealand. We also have here this afternoon is Eric Yaptanco, Country Head of Macquarie Group. With us also is Benjamin Romualdez, Country Managing Director of Telstra. Thank you for joining us, Eric and Benj. Also present with our board of members, we have our chairman, Mr. Edgar Chua. We also have Ambassador Jose L. Quisha, Mr. Ramon Del Rosario, Ms. Rosalina Mantaring, also Ms. Cosette Canilao, Dr. Aristotle Alit, and Mr. Peter Makera. Thank you for joining us. Before I turn over to Ambassador Quisha for the welcome remarks, let's take a couple of photos. We'll start off with the head table. Just stay on your seats and just give a big smile. We'll start off with the head table. After the head table, we'll be having a group shot. So again, stay on your seat, give a big smile. Our photographer, Daryl, will stay here on the side and on the other side. So we'll take 2 shots. Okay, one more for the group photo. Please look at our photographer and give your big smile, your best smile. One more on this side, please. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Look at Daryl. Okay. Thank you, everyone. To start us off, I would like to invite in front or on stage MBC Trustee Ambassador Jose L. Quisha to give the welcome remarks. Ambassador.
Good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of the Makati Business Club and my fellow board members who are present today, Ed, our chairman, Peter, Ramon, Riza, Cosette, and Aris, I believe Jaime is joining us later. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to today's event. A special welcome to Ambassador Peter Kell of New Zealand and Mr. Phil Nervig, the Economic Counselor of the U.S. Embassy. I'm very pleased to welcome Her Excellency Ambassador H.E Hae Kyong Yu and our colleagues from the Australian Embassy. It is not the first time that Ambassador Yu has attended an MBC event, but it is the first time where she is our principal guest. That's great because there's a lot going on between Australia and the Philippines, as well as between Australia and the region. And she can tell us more about that. Most of us know that our 2 countries just held our biggest joint military exercises in August, and that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese visited the Philippines on September 8, 2023, to meet President Marcos and upgrade our comprehensive partnership into a strategic one. MBC welcomes this upgrade, and we are grateful to Ambassador Yu for her instrumental role in ushering a new era for our partnership. I won't say too much about the defense part of the agreement. We all know what's going on in the region and what's going on in other parts of the world. The Russia-Ukraine war, the Israel-Hamas conflict. These are stark reminders that geopolitical tensions can lead to violent conflict. The right alliances are important not only to defend sovereignty and freedom, but as important to deter escalation so that defense isn't even necessary. As we speak, joint military exercises called Dawn Karacha 2023 is in progress in Palawan, further strengthening our alliance to promote peace and freedom in the region. But our partnership is not just about defense. It includes plans to work on supply chains, clean energy transition, mining and minerals processing, digital and creative economies, high-quality infrastructure development, and the so-called blue economy across various sectors such as fisheries, aquaculture, and maritime transport. Other areas include market access and free trade agreements, as well as education and food security. We look forward to ramping up trade and investment, especially with the recent launch of Australia's economic strategy for Southeast Asia. The report on the Southeast Asia strategy actually featured an MBC member ASEAN Corporation, as a case study for a successful Philippine investment in Australia with the help of Austrade. And this month, there is news that an investment deal team will be formed as a result of the recently concluded Philippine-Australia ministerial meetings. Australia remains as one of our top 5 sources of official grants and loans. Our bilateral trade and investment is valued at $8.2 billion US dollars, making Australia our 14th largest trading partner. All of this is aligned with MBC's own mission of promoting an environment for business to create more jobs and to better lives for our countrymen. As I said at the beginning, Australia has a growing role in the region. This is a reflection of Australia's own global character. Fully 48% of Australians have a foreign-born parent, and about half of the 48% are foreign-born themselves. Ambassador Yu is a reflection of that. She was born in South Korea and moved with her family to Australia when she was 11. She speaks Korean fluently, and most importantly, can watch Korean dramas without subtitles. Before joining the Foreign Service, she worked at the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, the Treasury, and the Australian Tax Office. At one point, she was seconded to the Korean government to assist with its presidency of the G20, and her family must have been extremely proud at that time. In the Foreign Service, she has covered the Middle East and Africa and served as Deputy Head of Mission in Japan, where she spent, I think, a total of about 6 years, I understand. So she can speak, I think, Japanese quite fluently. She's had a tight official schedule in Manila, including the visits of the Prime Minister, the Foreign, Defense, and Trade Ministers, and other high officials. But she's far from all work and no play. She says she and her husband are learning how to play golf, and that it's hard. Maybe you can ask Ed some tips. Less hard is checking out Philippine art and food, including discovering Australian-inspired restaurants like Panko and Roost Cafes. So if any of you want tips on authentic or innovative Australian-inspired restaurants, you know whom you can trade them with in exchange for some golf tips. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Her Excellency, Ambassador H.K. Yu.
Thank you so much, JLC. We'll now have the Q&A and open forum. Our Executive Director, Coco Alquaz, will facilitate this segment. So for this part, Coco will ask some questions first, but we hope you can join in later with your own questions. Please feel free to raise your hands, and my colleagues, Reina and Adrian, will go to you with mics.
What a charming introduction that was.
Coco, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Chris. If you have any questions, so we'll have about, I think, 15 or 20 minutes of conversation here, but we really want to bring in your questions after that. But if you have questions already, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. And my colleagues, Reina over there, and who's over here? Who? And Adrian over there in the back will come to you with a microphone. So please don't hesitate to raise your question as soon as possible so that we can get into the queue. Thank you very much again. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. And Ambassador, can I just thank you for such a wonderful, warm introduction of me. I really appreciated that. Thank you.
Ambassador, you got here about a year ago. What's been the most interesting experience so far?
Oh, the most interesting is, that's a really hard one to, to pick. But I must say, I think the highlight of my more than a year here has to be the arrival of the Prime Minister Albanese and the meeting between Prime Minister and President Marcos, and the depth of and the breadth of issues and discussions they held together. It was really truly a highlight of what's been a very exciting year in the Philippines. And it's true, the Philippines, you have more fun, because I've certainly been having lots of fun.
That was the first visit by Australian Prime Minister in about 20 years, is that correct?
Yes, as a bilateral visit. So I just wanted to clarify, we have had our Prime Minister come and visit in 2015 and 2017. But you'll recall that's when the Philippines was chairing ASEAN and APEC. So of course, as part of that, we had a Prime Minister come and also have a sideline bilateral meeting. But this is the first time in 20 years that an Australian Prime Minister made a bilateral visit to the Philippines. And I think it actually shows the significance of our relationship, to see the attention that our leaders are providing to the Philippines, because that visit actually followed what's been a very, very busy year for me and the embassy, because we had our Deputy Prime Minister come and visit twice, once in February and then in August. Then we had our special envoy on Southeast Asia visit in March. Now this is like a minister level appointment focused on Southeast Asia. Then we had our trade minister visit in April, with our foreign minister coming in May. These are pretty much top 3 leaders, political leaders in Australia for the Australian government. And I think that just shows the significance of this relationship right now.
And you had also the Defense Secretary, I think, and a slew of military officials visiting as well.
That's right. So our Chief of Staff equivalent, which is Chief of the Defence Force, along with Chief of every force, right? Army, Navy, Air Force, they've all been here. And it has been an really intense engagement. And the flow of visits have happened the other way around too. So we've had many high-level officials and leaders actually also going to Australia. And a big part of that has also been study tours and exchange of information that has been very focused from the Philippine side. So for example, we had ADCOM. As you know, the education is a big issue, and there's a joint committee been set up with Congressman Mark Goh and Senator Gatchalian. They went to Australia, led a big delegation to study how Australia is dealing with education reforms, looking at vocational education systems, and trying to obtain learnings from that for their own thinking about what's involved in the Philippine education. So that's one. Another really good example is study tours around green hydrogen and offshore wind. So we facilitated very senior level, at USEC level, tour to Australia to learn about that and take part in some regional summits that were held on this topic. So the list goes on, really, Coco.
Why is so much going on?
Why is so much?
Between all those visits that we had that you had in the first 6 months, that's, to my mind, hard to match by any country. And then all of these other activities that are going. Why is so much going on, and is it all of a sudden?
Well, it's not all of a sudden, but there's definitely been a step up in our engagement. Let me first start by talking about how long-standing this partnership has been. It's been since World War II, when Australian troops were part of actually helping with the liberation of the Philippines. So our government-to-government relationship goes back a long way, 77 years now, in fact. And during that time, we have always engaged with you in the defense and security space, in the development space, where our development program for the Philippines is Australia's 5th largest. And a lot of people are really surprised when I say that, but it actually is. And in the people-to-people links, where, of course, 400,000 Filipino Australians now call Australia home, our 5th largest diaspora as well. So that has always been in place. But in recent times, there's definitely been a step up. And I think the reasons for that are really obvious. One, we do live in a world where there is strategic competition right at our doors. We live in a very complex world with lots of challenges. Two, we live in a world where we've got global challenges that we all have to face, like climate change, that's now leading to food insecurity, and that's leading to need for energy transition to green energy. In a world like that, you really need your friends and partners more than ever. And this has really shown a light from both sides on the relationship that we already have, but also the fact that we are two countries that's been together through thick and thin, good times and bad times, but with absolute shared interests and values. And those factors are definitely bringing our two countries together. And one other factor that's adding to that, Coco, is the fact that in a strategically challenging environment, economic growth is also a very important tool that we all have. And without economic growth, we do not have strategic power. And to that extent, there's been absolute recognition and alignment of views that the Philippines and Australia have to work even more closely together in the trade and investment space, that we have to help each other grow economically. And I think it's all those factors that's coming together to really highlight the importance of this relationship. And just the one minor factor as well. Of course, with my arrival, we also saw two countries with new administration in power. And we all know that when governments come into power with a strong mandate, that's when you see a lot of action. That's when you see a lot of clear agenda being set in place. And for our government, they made it clear from day one that Australia's future, whether it's security or prosperity, depends on the security and prosperity of Southeast Asia. And they've really stepped up their engagement with Southeast Asia, and in particular, the Philippines.
because this is the Makati Business Club, what can the governments do and the private sectors, what can they do to step up the economic relationship the way the defense relationship has stepped up, the way the diplomatic relationship has stepped up, the way the people-to-people engagement has stepped up? What can be done there, and what are the great opportunities for both countries in that sphere?
Very good question, because frankly, when it comes to the economic space, you have to do the stepping up. Sure, the governments can set the right conditions and frankly get out of your way. But really, it's the business's leadership that makes things happen. So to assist that, certainly Australia's, and Ambassador mentioned, Australia's Southeast Asia Economic Strategy to 2040. The Australian government put Nicholas Moore, who is the former CEO of Macquarie, real proud Australian company, put him to task and said, you, as a very prominent businessman, go out there, find out what it is that the Australian government can do to really open the doors for trade and investment. And he has put together a very good strategy that I'm sure government will continue to follow. And when launching that, the government actually announced 3 initiatives immediately, almost like a down payment to show their commitment. And what they did was announce what's called investment deal teams. And that's government putting money where their mouth is. So we've got extra bodies helping the business navigate through, the regulations and requirements, but also assist business make deals. Okay, so
there's a team going to be based here.
That's right. So Manila's going to have a team here too within the embassy. So we're very excited about that. But it will actually have a much bigger system around it to support it, so that we have different agencies putting their, thinking caps on together, processing and looking at opportunities to try and do matching where possible, to try and help even with financing if that's needed through Australian government's export financing agency. So we are actually going to be doing that soon. The second initiative the government announced was to actually encourage business missions, so that we actually get more businesses together to go and visit Australia for opportunities and vice versa. And the government is willing to facilitate that and provide political leadership to that. And in fact, Minister Farrell, during our meeting in April, in Adelaide, announced that he would like to lead one early next year to the Philippines. The third one was actually exchange of young professionals through internships and exchange programs. And once again, Australian government is putting money on the table to facilitate this, so that you can actually, in your business, send your young up-and-comers to a really good Australian company in Australia to experience what it's like to work in an Australian company, but most importantly, to make those links for future partnerships, deals, businesses that could be possible through those relationships. So that's what the government is doing, and we're going to be doing more and more. And we are working closely with the Philippine government to ensure that some of the regulatory impediments or things like that are addressed, but also to ensure, we all know about the Green Lane investment, those processes are in place where both governments can help. The important thing with the business, so there are a number of ways you can really engage. I would really love the Philippine businesses to become more aware, to be inquisitive, and to become aware of opportunities in Australia.
How do they do that?
So, organising actual missions there, calling on us to find out more about things. And can I just say, already, so many of you are so active in that front, and we really love working with you. Already, my colleague Christopher Lim from Austrade, Senior Trade Commissioner, and I get lots of phone calls. Yeah, he needs a round of applause because he works so hard. get lots of phone calls from you when you've got a specific project in mind and you think, you know what, an Australian partner would be great in this. I wonder what's available. So it's those requests, those questions that we really welcome from you. And there's been some very prominent companies taking even an extra step to go to Australia for their management meetings. I won't give away who that is, and to look for different innovations, ideas, partners that may be possible from Australia. So these are all the different ways that you can actually raise your awareness of what's available in Australia and in Australian companies. The second thing that I would really highly recommend is to take exchange programs seriously. Really think about whether you can actually put some of your future leaders into Australian companies, and really think about having some of the Australian company future leaders come and work for you. Right? We can help you, but you don't actually need our help. You can actually do that in your own right. And the other thing is, I think, this idea of working with government is so important, and actually making use of existing industry network as well. So for those of you who are now interested, I'd really encourage you to join ANZCHAM. We have Australia-New Zealand Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines, which is really active. And we've got Banj Romualdez, one of yours, who works for a very prominent Australian company, Telstra, as the president of ANZCHAM. And Banj, stand up so people can see you, right? Join the chamber. In addition, we have very, very active Australia-Philippine Business Council and Philippine-Australia Business Council as well. So when we were meeting with our ministers in Adelaide, those council, along with ANZCHAM, put together a group of business delegates who presented to Secretary Pascal on their ideas and to Minister Farrell on their ideas. And guess what? Both Secretary and Minister were so delighted. They were really impressed. So I encourage you to be involved in these industry bodies as well.
Without divulging any secrets, what kinds of businesses excited you when
Well,
you heard that
I've got
conversation?
so many areas I'm so excited about in this relationship. And can I just say, in terms of the sectors that I think really have a lot of potential, I look at what the Philippines' priorities are, and I look at where Australia has real comparative advantage. And when you match them up, they're actually in the areas of agriculture, food security, very important issue for the Philippines, but one where Australia clearly has one of the best practices, I would say. Mining and critical minerals processing. This is an exciting area once again, because this has the potential for the Philippines to find your new source of growth. You know that Australia has been built on mining, a very effective mining sector. In fact, more than 10% of our economy comes from mining. In the Philippines, you are so minerals rich, yet you've only explored maybe 5, maximum 6% of your deposits. Now, sustainable mining is important, and this is where we can really come in, work together to achieve that. So mining is another area, sorry.
So you mentioned agri and mining.
Sure.
So with agri, is Australian agri so advanced that it's hard to adapt those technologies to the kinds of problems we have?
So there is an element of that, but you've got to aim big, right? And so with agriculture, there are two factors to it. One is around food security, where we should really trade more on food. We should be getting more Philippine, agricultural goods into Australia, your fresh produce, and we should be getting more into your market because they're quality, affordable products. So that's one element, trade. But coming to agriculture, we actually start with something as basic but as important as soil management. So it starts from there. Sure, in the Philippines, you do have some issues or difference with Australia in terms of scale of agriculture. So you have small plots because of your land title around agricultural land. So that's one issue that, in my kind of humble opinion, that needs to be addressed down the line, where perhaps you could see more consolidation to allow large-scale, economies of scale farming. But even if you take it right down to soil management, there are lots of things that we can share with you. So we currently have, this was actually signed as part of the strategic partnership, a memorandum of understanding on soil health strategy. And what Australian government is doing with you on that is actually working with specific provinces. We've chosen 4 provinces because they all have different soil composition, and working with them to research how you can achieve optimal soil health for agricultural production. And it's all to do with nitrogen in the soil and not wanting to acidify the soil, and applying science and research into helping you maximize your agricultural productivity. So that's just one example.
When it comes to mining, Australia's looked at Philippine mining for many decades with lots of fits and starts, more fits than starts sometimes. Does that kind of reputation turn off Australian investors now?
I have to say, I mean, to some extent it's true, of course. You've only just recently lifted moratorium on open pit mining. So that uncertainty has, if you want to call it, scared some of the Australian investors away. I think there's some truth to that. Also, I think a lot of your deposits are in Mindanao, where we have had some security issues because of, terrorism issues there. That has also been an additional factor. But we all know these things are all being addressed. And in fact, I go to Mindanao all the time and I've never felt so safe, right? It's a beautiful part of the country. And Australian government is actively informing Australian businesses about how, the environment has changed. And there is now finally a realization by Australian businesses and investors that we better get onto it and not miss out on this opportunity by being too late. Of course, there are brilliant Australian companies, in fact, around 250, who's never left the Philippines, who's always seen amazing opportunity that exists in this country and have done very, very well through the whole period. But we are seeing more and more Australian businesses paying serious attention to the Philippines and realizing that the business environment is very, very good right now.
I hope there's going to be questions about business when we turn to the audience. But first, let me ask one last question before we turn to the audience, and more about defense. How critical is the situation now in this area, whether it's the South China Sea or broader than that? Which is the background, I guess, for why Australia and other countries have become so active in this region.
My Deputy Prime Minister, when he was here, and he was asked about a few questions, he made this point. He said, Australia actually can be attacked, right? Or our interests can be jeopardized well before any warship or anything comes anywhere near our borders. Why? Because we are investment and export-driven country. 50% of Australian exports in 2017 went through the South China Sea. Just sit back and imagine that. 50%, right? A bit less number, about 35% of our imports went through the South China Sea. The South China Sea is a very important international waterway for the whole global community. And in a world where, we want to all prosper, what we need is to make sure that might is not always right, that sovereignty is respected, and that we all operate based on some sort of rules that we agree to. Thank you. Right? We have to live in a world where it's driven by rules-based order. This is why, for Australia, we are so passionate about supporting the Philippines in the South China Sea and making sure it remains a free and open region. And in fact, can I just tell you, I was there when 2016 Arbitral Award was delivered, and there was still quite a lot of tension about all of that in the world. And it was the then Australian Prime Minister who got up during Shangri-La dialogue and basically publicly supported the Philippines on the Arbitral Award. And our position has been consistent on that. And we emphasize the importance, especially when it comes to seas, of countries operating within UNCLOS. So I hope that explains to you why we are so passionate about it and why this issue is so important to the rest of the international community as well.
Thanks, Ambassador. We'll turn to questions from the audience. There's one over here already. Anyone else on this side, please raise your hand and my colleague will come to you. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, Madam Ambassador. Thank you for your time. My name is Vince Cortez, and I'm from Macquarie. So my question is, with the recently concluded referendum in Australia on Indigenous people, what do you think is the message that the outcome of that referendum is sending to its allies and its friends around the world? Thank you.
Thank you for that very tricky question. For those of you who may not have actually been following it, Australia just recently had a referendum on what's called the Voice referendum. Australia is a proud nation of Indigenous community whose history is the longest in civilization. We have Indigenous community that's been there for more than 60,000 years. Just 60,000 years. I didn't misannounce that. And they have been there to live with the land, and we regard them as the traditional owners of the land that we live in. We have been having this debate in Australia for many, many, many decades, really, about how we can appropriately recognise Indigenous communities' voice through our government system. So the government had put forward a referendum that actually proposed that we put together a council, a committee, that can actually provide advice to Parliament on any legislation or anything that are going through Parliament that will affect the Indigenous people. That would actually be incorporated into our Constitution. Okay, so that was the referendum. The referendum was held and the Australian public voted no. So there was a majority vote of no. I think this is actually, first of all, we've had a number of referendums, and when it comes to changing the Constitution, Australians are very reluctant to go there, right? So there's very few that's actually passed when it comes to changing the Constitution. And I think you can also relate to that because you've had similar questions and discussions in the Philippines as well. That's the first thing. Second, I think what this is showing is Australia's vibrant democracy, right? With any issue like this, we had pro-campaigns and against campaigners, right? And there were robust discussions about these issues, both benefits and, risks, if you like, of letting this through. And they were all carried out in a very peaceful and respectful way. And at the end of the day, of course, we respect the actions of democracy. From Australian government's perspective, so it means Constitution change? No. But we also actually have a very extensive agenda already underway that's all about closing the gap between the Indigenous community and the rest of the Australian community, and all about addressing their needs in a way that is determined by our Indigenous community. All of that work will continue. All of that will continue. And Australian government's development priorities will continue to be inclusion. Inclusion. And that involves gender equality as well as Indigenous people's rights. So I hope that explains where this is going to go next for Australia.
Any questions here? One more here.
Hi, good afternoon, Ambassador HK. Thank you so much for speaking with us. It's very exciting to hear how there's so much potential for relationship, trade, and otherwise with Australia. I'm Lolly C, Focus Global Inc. We're a distributor of American and European brands, and maybe soon Australian brands.
Yes, please.
Yeah. My question is more of a complex global issue, but I just would love to hear your thoughts and opinion on, is there a view, as far as Australia is concerned, on a short-term or long-term solution to what's now the most pressing issue of the day, which is the Israel and Palestinian conflict, especially with the alignment of different superpowers, where Putin has visited Beijing, Biden is in Israel. What would be your thoughts on that? Thank you.
You haven't served there yet, right? You haven't served in the Middle East yet.
I have.
You have?
Yes. So yes, that's a very, very complex question, as you said. And these are issues that the world has been grappling with for many, many, many decades. It's really sad what's happening in Israel and Gaza, because there are, innocent lives being lost. Australian government's position on this is very clear. Hamas's attack on Israel is just absolutely unforgivable. That has been a real terrorist act. In Australia, Hamas is listed as a terrorist group. And we support Israel's right to self-defend. And as this issue unfolds, what we would like to see is for all parties to adhere to humanitarian international law. Our absolute objective has to be to protect civilians and to ensure that humanitarian assistance is provided to those vulnerable people that actually need it. In terms of longer term objective here, the international community has always called for two-state solution, where Israel and Palestinians come together and negotiate between them to work out how they're going to coexist within the boundaries and within the boundaries. Now, I think it's true that what's happening right now has set that back, probably for many, many more years again. And that's why this is really, really heartbreaking. But I think what the international community can do is to really encourage those who are in this conflict right now not to escalate, to be very thoughtful in ensuring that this does not spread out into getting more countries and more players involved. I think that it really has to be our number one objective, to try and de-escalate as much as possible and hopefully to find some sort of stability. So that's basically the Australian government's view, and we have been consistent in encouraging those to find peace again.
Could I transpose that question back home here?
Yes.
There are two big players in this region, China and then the US. How does one encourage both of them not to escalate either?
Well, I think, that kind of poses the question as though both are escalating, and I might have to address that assumption. I think we have to start with how, especially in the West Philippine Sea, we know that the Philippines is actually doing what is within your legal right. And 2016 Arbitral Award made that very, very clear. And so, who's really escalating? Right, I think that's the first question. And obviously the second question, or second point I want to make is that the US has been the global superpower, and I think we also have to remember that it was the US that underpinned the rules-based order that we have today. So whether it's Australia or the Philippines, we have frankly been beneficiaries of the US deciding, even as a superpower, that what was needed was some sort of rules that everyone gets to participate in and determine, and for that to apply to all. Whether it's Bretton Woods system with the IMF and the World Bank, it was really the US that was a leading country to shape that. Having said that, as you said, how do we encourage both countries not to escalate? This is where Australian government has made it very clear. Communication is key. We really encourage the two countries to open up and keep that communication channel going so as to avoid terrible miscalculation or missteps. Sometimes my Prime Minister and Foreign Minister describe this as guardrails. We believe for the world stability and peace, that what we'd really like to see is some sort of guardrails in place, and for countries like Australia and the Philippines to continue to encourage both the US and China to maintain that communication.
We have time for two more questions. There's one more right now. If anyone else has another question, please raise your hand.
Madam Ambassador, good afternoon. I'm Peter McCarroll with Microsoft. Just my question, what in your view can you guide us? What are these limiters and blockers with regulations and policies that you can have us concentrate on to attract more agricultural, mining, and Australian firms in the Philippines?
Well, I think the trend, the Philippine government's current projection on that is really, really positive. And while I've got examples of very specific little, barriers, if you want to call it that, or regulation, my experience so far has been that when we reach out to organizations like ATA, so that's Anti-Red Tape Agency, they get it resolved. They put heads together across the whole of the Philippine government, and they've been able to solve the problems for us. And I think the movement with Public Service Act is a fantastic signal to the foreign investors, because up until then, obviously foreign investors couldn't own anything 100% here, and in that environment it becomes really hard for foreign investors to commit. And so I think opening up in certain sectors have also been very positive. In that regard, though, I do want to caution, and I know the Philippine government is very seized on this as well, that those measures, as they open up, have appropriate the measures in place to ensure your economic security is at least protected. Okay, so that's been Australia's experience. In some of the critical infrastructure sectors, we recognized that there are things in our economy we don't want a foreign country to own and control for very obvious reasons. And as the Philippines look to open, and we love it, we love how the Philippines is opening up to foreign investment, just bear in mind that angle, that it actually there are some safeguards you do have to build in, especially when it comes to critical infrastructure sectors, like telecommunication, like electricity, and things like that. But I think those are all very, very positive signals. One other thing I would say in terms of regulation making, just sometimes you have regulation that has a very clear purpose, right? Very, very clear objective, but in the way it's introduced, sometimes interacts with existing regulation to produce unwanted, unintended outcomes. And so we've come across a few situations like that, where you've kind of go, surely that wasn't the intent, right? Surely you don't want to disadvantage your domestic industry. Right. So one of this came about because we do actually have an Australian company that operates in the Philippines. And because of these regulatory, weird effects, they were going to be disadvantaged compared to a company that's importing stuff straight in, right? Made overseas and imported in. We thought, come on, that doesn't make sense. The thing is though, when we raised this, and I've even raised it with President Marcos, completely open to suggestions and recognition that there is an issue that needs to be solved. And they are busily working towards solving it. So I think these are some of the high-level things that I wanted to highlight. And I think all of those things are actually on the right track. But the Philippines really does have to cut out some red tape, right? Really have to cut out red tape. And in that, local government units has to be a big part of it. So it's no good, no point if national government is driving all this reform, right, to streamline things, if then on top of that, you've got local government units to deal with. So red tape, really have to cut it out. And I think this move towards digitalization hopefully will help to some extent, but it's really got to be just how you introduce regulation and how they are then implemented. That's the key.
Thanks. Is there a last question? Okay, last question goes to Michael.
Madam Yu, Ambassador, it's a privilege to be with you today.
Thank you.
And what you have told us is highly motivating. Yeah, really. And that's why I will make it very easy. I have no question. But I have maybe one or the other observation. One observation is, well, first of all, myself. Michael Reuber is my name. I'm 50 years here in the Philippines already. So longer than 2/3 of all Filipinos, I'm always saying. Okay, I have 3 sons, I have 3 grandsons, so I'm really very much integrated in the Philippines. But of course, I was born in Germany. I was there for 18 years, plus 15 years, so now you know my age. But anyway, so what is very important, one of the things here is that very important, is we should rule out any miscalculations. Why? Because what happened in Europe? We have a war up to now. And I think, amongst others, based on miscalculations. So looking now here at Asia and all you have said, I think it is very important to bring the message across that there should not be and there cannot be any miscalculations. And that is why it is so enlightening and nice to hear that the free world, the democratic world, is getting closer and closer together. We just recently had also another very important visitor here, Ursula von der Leyen, and she made some very important announcements during that time, but also talking about what I'm talking about right now. She said, we stand behind our friends. We stand behind democracy. And it is very important for anybody who has other ideas to know that this unity is there and hopefully will prevent anything which we don't want to have, another war. So that was one. The other one is an opportunity, big opportunity, which hasn't been, at least not to, in my mind, has been sufficiently presented. And that is, my business is logistics, transportation. there are huge opportunities here in Asia, particularly in intra-Asia. First of all, intra-Asia, because for the Philippines that hasn't been harvested at all, because all shipments to and from the Philippines are carried by foreign carriers in containers. There's not one Philippine flag shipping line going international right now. We have our own shipping line, but right now we are focused on domestic. But we have presented to ARTA, amongst others, but also to the Office of the President, points which needed to be addressed to really harvest the potentials of intra-Asia container shipping. And intra-Asia container shipping, just to give you some figures, 42 million TEUs, 20-foot container equivalents, were transported intra-Asia in 2022, which is, I think, even more important, 35% of the global international trade. So it is very, very big. Now, talking now about Australia and the Philippines and now being partners and so on, I think we should, my dream, which used to be intra-Asia container lines development, not only our line, but lines in general, maybe we should change this and call the dream Australasia container lines development. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. I'm going to change what I was originally going to ask as the last question. There's been some talk on and off, including by at least one of your prime ministers, about Australia joining ASEAN. Is that a pipe dream? Is that realistic? How does that work out?
Yeah, well, personally, I think it would be great, but that's not the government's line, because obviously ASEAN, whoever joins the ASEAN, it's up to ASEAN, right? And so certainly as the first dialogue member to ASEAN, and as a country that really values ASEAN centrality, we want to be very respectful of what ASEAN members think are the best thing, in their best interest. But no matter what the decision by ASEAN, our commitment to ASEAN is rock solid. We were the first ASEAN dialogue partner, and since then, we have been very active in engaging with ASEAN, and we have been very good partners, I'd like to think, in making sure that ASEAN as a bloc can exercise its agency to create a region that we all want to live in. One that is peaceful, stable, and prosperous, and where sovereignty is respected and it's determined by rules-based order. That's our shared objective with ASEAN. And so we will continue to work with ASEAN towards that goal. And in fact, we are celebrating our 50th anniversary of our partnership next year in Melbourne between 4th and 6th of March. And President Marcos has kindly confirmed his attendance when my Prime Minister was here in September. So we're really looking forward to the celebration of our partnership.
Last question is this: you got a good reception when you talked about anti-red tape. So obviously this audience is very much anti-red tape. They're also very much, I think, pro-golf. Could I get a raise of hands for people here who play golf? Okay. So you got your audience here.
My full admiration to all of you.
Ambassador.
Because it's so hard.
Could you tell them, and
Yes.
I don't play golf, so I don't know how to ask this question.
Okay.
What is so hard about golf, or what part of golf is so hard for you, so that we can get a volunteer, to help you on weekends?
Well, I think it's because I have terrible sports sense, so therefore terrible hand-eye coordination. And when my coach tells me how to do the swing, like the position you have to end up in feels so unnatural. Like, I'm like, how is a body supposed to contour like that and stay like that? Now, my coach tells me, well, you've got to keep practicing until that feels completely natural. And it hasn't happened yet. So that's the first one. The second one is, I don't know how people put so much energy into it so that the ball actually picks up into air, because every time I hit it, it kind of dribbles on the floor. So that's another one. I obviously haven't worked out the technique. So there you are. Any tips, welcome. Any tips, welcome.
On your way out, several of them will come over to you and offer to
Yes,
to give you more
probably.
tips.
Yes, that's right.
Please join me in thanking the ambassador for today's discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Are we supposed to stay here first? Yes? Yes, I'll turn over to our, I think we stay here. I'll turn over to my colleague, Chris.
Once again, thank you so much, Ambassador Yu, and I'm pretty sure that later on we're going to discussions about golf later. Okay. So before we close this program, Ambassador, we heard that you and your husband are treasure hunters of some sort in looking for Philippines and Australian inspired or fusion dishes in the country. So we actually found a local rendition of lamington called alembong, which is basically a sponge cake coated with ube and coconut flakes. So we hope you enjoy this
I love
and that
it.
you like the small token of our appreciation. All right, so thank you all so much for your active participation. Before we end, we will proceed to the photo opportunity segment of our program. So we have 2 batches for photo taking. To start the sequence, may we ask the ambassador to stay on stage, and we invite our board members to join Coco and Ambassador Yu on stage. All right, so for the second round of photo taking, we invite our event sponsors, Eric Yaptanco, Shelon Narvaez, and Benjamin Romualdez, to join our board members in front. All right, thank you so much. Please feel free to take your seats.
Thank you very much.
Once again, thank you all very much for joining us for a lively discussion this afternoon. That officially concludes our program for today. But please feel free to stay a little longer for networking. Once again, thank you all and good luck. Please share your comments and feedback on today's event by scanning the QR code on the screen or the one at your table. Okay. Stay up to date on MBC events, activities, and advocacies by following us on social media. And lastly, this event is the first of MBC's lineup of events for the fourth quarter sprints. We invite you to join us in our upcoming events. On November 16, Global Leaders Session 2 with Acciona Construction Global CEO Huberto Moreno. On November 29, Global Leaders Session 3 with Sun Life Global CEO Kevin Strain. Thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you again at our future events. Thank you and stay safe.
Wow, galing.